When designing a Dark Sun campaign for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, there are certain questions which naturally and immediately arise. First of all, how do you handle the different lineages and different types of people between Dark Sun on one hand and a Forgotten Realms setting? How do you handle psionics and magic? How do you handle extra planar beings? How do you handle money and the existence of metal? Well, we're going to answer all of those, in fact, in that order, before jumping into Rime of the Frostmaiden and looking at that introductory section called Welcome to the Far North and making a couple of changes there too. Hey everyone, welcome to PhD&D, I'm Dr. Bowers, and this is part 2 of our 8-part series on converting Rime of the Frostmaiden into a Dark Sun adventure. As I stated last time, my goal is ultimately for this to be simple and convenient and easy. We're going to be designing a Dark Sun campaign with minimal effort, in other words. We're not going to come up with our own systems, we're not going to make up a bunch of new rules and add them on top of D&D's existing rule set, and in general, we are going to adhere to the philosophy of reskin, don't rewrite. Reskin, don't rewrite. Now, in this video, we're going to cover some general mechanical features which are going to be applied throughout our entire conversion of the Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign. Some general things about lineage, magic, materials and resources, and extra planar beings. Let's talk about lineage first. In a Dark Sun campaign setting, the people of Athis tend to include the following: Aarakocra, dwarves, elves, halflings, humans, Goliaths, and Thri-kreen. That's it, just those people. So when it comes to the NPCs in your campaign, you'll want to make sure that all of them are drawn from those groups. Here's a little conversion chart to use throughout the module as we go through it. We will appeal to this and bring it back, so don't worry, this isn't the only time it'll be on screen. As you can see, if the NPC is a Dragonborn, we're just going to redescribe them as a Thri-kreen. Unless the player character is getting combat with such an NPC, we don't have to worry about using the Thri-kreen stat block from the monster manual. If they do, of course, we could use that stat block, but for now, let's just focus on the idea that when we see a Dragonborn, we're going to redescribe it as a Thri-kreen, a praying mantis type creature. When it comes to the Duergar, or Duergar, which are featured prominently in Rime of the Frostmaiden, we're going to redescribe those as human Templars. They are the human Templars of the Sorcerer King Kalik in exile. Duergar normally have the ability to enlarge themselves and also to turn invisible, and the Templars of a Sorcerer King are supposed to have some powers also. I think those are fitting powers for a Templar, why not? Again, reskin, don't rewrite. Moving on to the dwarves and the elves, we're just going to keep them as dwarves and elves, but redescribe them as being Dark Sun denizens. Dwarves will be hairless, elves will be super tall, but otherwise all the stats will be the same. Now when it comes to halflings, we're actually going to redescribe those as Thri-kreen as well. This isn't because there aren't halflings on Athis, on the contrary, they are. It's just that when it comes to the halfling NPCs in this adventure, they tend to be personable and friendly and you can talk to them, whereas the halflings on Athis are not personable, friendly, and you can't really talk to them. We will have halflings in our Dark Sun campaign adventure, it's just that they're going to be hostile. When it comes to human NPCs, just keep them as humans. When it comes to gnome NPCs, what few there are, just turn them into Thri-kreens again. Goliaths will remain absolutely unchanged, since, after all, Dark Sun has extra big humanoids. And when it comes to tieflings, and there are a few cool tieflings in this adventure, we're just going to replace them with Aarakocra. We're going to keep the exact same stats for them, but add a flying speed of 50 feet. That's it. Just add a flying speed of 50 feet, but keep everything else the same. And of course, describe them as being bird people and not devil people. So that's how we're going to handle our NPCs. That's how we're going to describe the NPCs in this campaign. But what about the PCs? Well, there are basically two possibilities for your player characters. If your players choose to be one of the natural residents of Athis, if they choose to be a Thri-kreen or a hairless dwarf or a human, that's fine. But what if they want to play as something that isn't normally found on Athis? What if they want to play a kobold, or a warforged, or a fairy, or a dhampir? Do you just say no? Well, that's one thing you could do, but personally, I wouldn't say no. If a player wants to play as a non-standard lineage, let them. I would just add the following component to the story, that this player character is unique and mysterious. This is a player character that has unknown parents. They were just found in the desert, raised as an orphan. And I would like to add, they were found with a mysterious item, maybe a mysterious piece of jewelry or a mysterious tool of some kind. And we are going to build into our campaign that this mysterious item actually came from the lost city which we will substitute for Yithrin. We're going to say that the mysterious item came from there, and maybe in some sense the PC did too. I think this is a perfectly acceptable way to have the Dark Sun setting be the Dark Sun campaign setting, and still allow all of your players the full gamut of options afforded in the player's handbook and all the auxiliary guides like Tasha's and Xanathar's. You want to be a Dhampir? Fine, that's cool, be a Dhampir. But no one knows where you came from. No one understands what you are. Some people fear you, some people hate you. And you should probably consider one of your personal quests to be self-discovery. Where did I come from? And that would hook nicely with the campaign that we're going to build out of Rime of the Frostmaiden. So don't worry about restricting lineages or background options from your players. Just make sure that if they deviate from the natural people of Athos, that in the story they are regarded as unique and mysterious. Moving on to the topic of magic and abilities. Dark Sun is a campaign setting which is notorious for having psychic powers everywhere. So, here's a good rule. Make sure that every character has one of the following feats from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Either the telepathic feat or the telekinetic feat. Every NPC should have one of these, and you should let all of your players choose one of those feats for their player characters upon creation. I don't think any player would object to this. I think they'd regard it as making everything more fun. And in the spirit of that, you could propose the following. In our Dark Sun campaign setting, we're just going to take all the arcane spellcasting, all of the spellcasting done by wizards, all of the spellcasting done by warlocks and bards, and we are going to re-describe it as the use of psychic powers. That's it. We're just going to take arcane magic and re-describe the spells as being not the results of wizardry or eldritch manipulation of the weave, but of channeling the forces of the psychic mind. We are going to keep all of the same stats, keep the casting time, keep the damage types, everything. We're just going to reskin it as being psychic powers and not magic spells. This is actually quite easy to do. Consider the spell Fireball. How might that be a psychic power? Well, here's how. Suppose that Fireball is really just the use of telekinesis at the subatomic level, using your mind to move matter, tiny bits of matter, particles, rubbing them against each other, generating subatomic frictions and heat and energy until, kaboom! Fireball. Or the spell Gust of Wind. Just suppose it's not actually wind that you're wielding, it's telekinetic energy that's forcing people back. And Magic Missile? I think you mean Psychic Missile, right? A little bolt of mental energy that you have thrown out through your psychic powers. Even when it comes to conjuration spells, you can do this. Just suppose that when you conjure something, what's really happening is you are using psychic powers to bend space-time and to summon here something that was originally far away over there. In the place of beasts and creatures which are normally conjured from outside the material plane, keep all of the stats of what would have been conjured and just re-describe it as something that you would be able to find on Athos, a giant bug or a giant lizard or something. Now, in the spirit of re-describing magic as actually the use of psychic powers, I would get rid of material spell components. Material spell components have a kind of controversial status in the 5th edition D&D community anyway. Not everyone likes to pay attention to them or track them. A lot of people will hand-wave them by saying, oh, I've got a spell component pouch or whatever. And so here we have an actual excuse to ditch them. As for somatic and verbal components, I would personally keep those because I think they interact importantly with other abilities like to cast silence and so forth. And I think it's absolutely fine that someone would have a psychic ability, but they just can't quite turn it on unless they wiggle their fingers in a certain way or cry out a certain word. The mind is weird. The only exception to this general strategy of re-describing spellcasting as psionics would be, first, the Sorcerer King Kalik, who is definitely going to be using magic when he fights the PCs. Oh yes, he will fight the PCs. And secondly, as with the adventure Curse of Strahd, we are going to have to put the ban on a couple of spells which would normally transport the players into another plane of existence. Spells like Plane Shift and Dream of the Blue Veil, we're going to get rid of those ones. We just won't make those spells available, and in their place, players can choose different spells or they can choose the teleportation spell. So there we have, in one stroke, a single way of dealing with magic and psionics for our Dark Sun setting. Just re-describe the magic as psionics. It's that easy. Now, if you want a separate, different psionics system that you can use in your Dark Sun campaign setting, that's fine. Feel free to do all that extra work. I'm not doing it. I'm doing it the easy way. Now, when it comes to NPC clerics, we're going to replace all of them with druids, and we're going to replace their temples with groves where they grow meager, benign little cacti and other desert plants. From their groves, these druids will conjure water and generally be helpful, or at least as helpful as the clerics are described in Rime of the Frostmaiden. When it comes to PC clerics, however, we're going to be lazy again. We're going to let the clerics keep all of their spells, keep all of their abilities, and maybe even allow it to be nature magic. We can redescribe it as nature magic. The only thing really to tell the player is that in this adventure, they are not going to be interacting with their deity in any way. They won't hear from their deity, they won't see their deity, they won't have visions of their deity, and when it comes to the access to their spells, they can use their spells and access them normally. It's just not clear exactly how they get them. Is it really from a god, or could it be from the natural world? That'll just be an open mystery in the adventure. And when it comes to such clerics, I would make them unique and mysterious. No one else can do what they do, and they might have a certain renown in their community for that. So there we have the way of dealing with magic and abilities in a Dark Sun campaign setting for 5th edition. Reskin, don't rewrite. Next up, extraplanar creatures. There are a couple of extraplanar creatures in this adventure. I recall reading that there was a chain devil, for instance. I think in this case, you should redescribe all devils, demons, and other extraplanar creatures as just being humanoids that are using psionics. Instead of having a devil that is magically wielding a bunch of chains, have a human who is psychically commanding a bunch of chains. Instead of a demon that's hurling hellfire, you've got a human who's psychic, who's hurling psychic energy. The one exception, I think, would be elementals. Elementals are canonical in the Dark Sun campaign setting, and so if the extraplanar being happens to be an elemental, that's fine, just leave it an elemental. After that, money and metal. Metal is incredibly rare in Athos, so it isn't used for coins. So instead of having copper pieces and gold pieces, we are going to have ceramic pieces and jade pieces respectively. We're also going to ignore all the other coins. We're going to ignore electrum and silver and blah blah blah, platinum. We're not going to have any of those. We're just going to have gold and copper. We're going to change any other coins to gold and copper, and then actually it's not really gold and copper, it's jade and ceramic respectively. 100 ceramic pieces to 1 jade piece, that's the currency system. When it comes to weapons and armor, first of all, we're going to redescribe all the weapons and all the armor so that they're actually made of bone and chitin, that is the exoskeleton material of giant insects. We'll keep the armor classes, we'll keep the damages, but if you want one little mechanical difference between the rare and useful metal tools and these non-metal ones, let's have it be this. If a weapon isn't made of metal, then it breaks on an attack roll of a natural 1. And if a piece of armor isn't metal, then it will break when struck with an attack roll which was a natural 20. Thus, we have an optional rule which is very easy to implement, which allows us to simulate the idea that not only are there very few metal weapons, but there is a consequence for them not being metal, and finding a metal weapon is therefore pretty important. Again, it's an optional rule. If you just feel like reskinning, I think that's fine too. So, now we have discussed lineage, magic and psionics, extraplanar creatures, and how money and metal are going to work. Let's actually turn to the module Rime of the Frostmaiden and start looking at its early pages and how we're going to convert them. Alright, Rime of the Frostmaiden. I love that cover, by the way. Credits, title, contents. Alright, so here there is an adventure summary, and famously there are 3 different main quests in this adventure. We're going to kick out one of them. We will ignore the story plot with Auriel the Frostmaiden and her control over the 10 towns and that stuff. We're just going to throw that right out. There are 2 reasons for this. First of all, she is a goddess, and in Athos there are no deities. And secondly, her presence in this adventure is used as an explanation for why the environment is so harsh, why it is never daylight, and why the night is so freezing and cold and eternal. On Athos, however, we don't need an explanation for why the environment is so harsh. It just is that harsh. It is that hot. The world is that bad. It's not a god playing tricks on people. Now, as for what's going on in our adventure, here's what has happened. The city of Tyr has recently lost its king, the sorcerer king Kalak, who was overthrown just as he was attempting to ascend to dragonhood. The unthinkable had happened. The people of Tyr rose up and overthrew their leader. In our version of the story, King Kalak fled and now hides somewhere in exile with his remaining Templars, trying to scrape together the life force he needs in order to ascend to dragonhood and then wreak revenge on the city that had ousted him. Players will begin in the Tyr region, and they will eventually make their way to that hideout, confront King Kalak, and only have him escape in dragon form and have to confront him again. After that, the player characters will be led to a lost jungle and a hidden magical city therein that holds all kinds of mysteries and secrets. Now, we're going to fill in the story in detail as we cover all of the specific chapters of this module. I thought I would just give an overview here because there is an adventure summary on these pages. Moving forward, here we have, I'm sorry, I have to stop and mention this, adventure flowchart. Look at this. This isn't a flowchart, this is a list. It's just a list. Right? A flowchart has at least one bifurcation, doesn't it? Like at least one choice or whatever. I think this module is definitely written so as to be excerpted and mixed and matched, but it's kind of funny that they have a flowchart here that's supposed to contain everything. I don't think you can do everything in this module, and it's a little foolish to try. Certainly our adaptation is not going to adapt everything from the book. We're just going to take bits of the book, adapt it, and turn that into our Dark Sun adventure. Anyway, here we go. Here's the first thing that we are going to change. Avalanches. We're just going to keep all of that and replace snow with sand. These are rock slides. Instead of avalanches, we're going to have rock slides. We're going to keep all of the same rules about making a strength saving throw, getting buried, getting dug up, how fast the rock slide moves. But we're just going to say it's a rock slide full of sand and debris and not an avalanche full of snow and debris. Easy. Next up, blizzards. We have some rules for blizzards here about how they extinguish fire, erase tracks, confer disadvantage on ranged weapons. We're going to keep all of that too. We're just going to say that instead of it being a blizzard, it's a sandstorm. The sandstorm will do all of the things that a blizzard can do. It'll just be blasting heat and scarring sand instead of flurries of snow and ice. Then we've got the rules for extreme cold here. Just replace them with extreme heat. And finally, when it comes to fishing for knucklehead trout, I would just change that to hunting for birds or insects. Say that a player can do this if they just crouch on the ground somewhere and they have a net, and they try to throw the net up into the sky just as a flying thing passes by. We keep all of the checks and saving throws in place. We keep the statistics for a knucklehead trout. We just describe it as a giant bug or a bird. And we say that instead of getting pulled into the water, a character who fails the wrong save will just lose their net as it gets wrapped around a bug and the bug pulls it away. Frigid water, we're not going to worry about. Illumination, we're not going to worry about. Overland travel. For overland travel, we're going to keep all of this the same, except for instead of dog sleds, we're going to have wagons or sleds pulled by enixes or kenks. Enixes are giant lizards that are domesticated and used as pack animals and mounts, and kenks are docile giant beetles that are also used as pack animals and mounts on Athos. Just change the dogs to big lizards or big beetles. Mountain travel we won't worry about, pronunciation we won't worry about. As mentioned, Goliaths are available as a PC lineage, and we are done with that opening section. So that's it for the overview of the mechanics and general changes which we are going to make to Rime of the Frostmaiden as we convert all of its chapters into specific bits of a larger Dark Sun adventure. Next time, we're going to take a look at 3 of the 10 towns and turn them into a village of Saltview outside of Tyr, the smithing district of Tyr, and the former nobles district of Tyr. I'm going to make that video as soon as I can. Stay tuned. And if you want to get notifications of when that video goes live, make sure that you click like and subscribe and hit that bell icon. Thanks very much for watching. See you soon.